on February 19th, 2025, 0841 UTC NASAs. Deep Space Network recorded a timing delay in the transmission from 3I Atlas. The signal, routed through the L2 corridor, arrived 2.7 milliseconds late. At first, the anomaly seemed trivial thermal noise or software drift, but when cross-checked with JWST's photon relay, the same delay appeared, synchronized across both systems separated by 1.5 million kilometers. Data engineers reran the clock synchronization test. Atomic timers at Goldstone and Canberra agreed to within 1 nanosecond. The instruments were flawless. Reality was not. The deviation implied a microcurvature in the gravitational field, too small for Einstein's equations to register, but large enough for the data to insist. NASA's audit flagged the event as Drift Anomaly Series 944, 3I Atlas logged it as gravitational offset, probable systemic, neither definition fit. For a century, light speed had been law constant, sacred, immovable. Now it wavered. The numbers described something slower than constant, a field resisting itself. Gravity had not increased. It had bent in tension. Engineers rerouted the observation through secondary calibration beacons. The delay persisted, moving in rhythm with solar wind density, as if gravity itself breathed with the sun. Each pulse of radiation arrived a fraction later, as though time were negotiating its own velocity. At JWST's telemetry bay, the patterns began to repeat. Spectral lines drifted in synchrony, tiny ripples that defied random chance. The instruments saw a pattern where chaos was expected, a memory embedded in motion. It was not acceleration that changed, but the act of moving itself. 3I Atlas mirrored the readings, confirming that the signal delay oscillated with predictable symmetry. In physics, symmetry means order. Here, it meant disobedience. Something in the gravitational field had learned how to adjust. By March, the anomaly no longer appeared as error. It appeared as signature. A mark written into space-time, steady, indifferent, exact. The constants we trusted to anchor velocity were now participants in their own revision. The audit concluded that the universe had edited its own arithmetic. For the first time, motion questioned its definition, and gravity answered with delay. The collapse began quietly, not in the instruments, but in the definitions. To recalculate the speed of light was to question the foundation of time. Every equation depending on C began to breathe. Constants were not numbers anymore. They were opinions held by reality, sir. NASA's audit expanded across 3 continents. Goldstone in California, Canberra in Australia, and Madrid's deep space antenna all recorded the same offset, the same hesitation in light. The delay behaved like gravity thinking. The control teams assumed hardware drift. They rebooted atomic clocks, recalibrated fiber links, reset relays. The delay persisted, growing more coherent, less random. Then 3I Atlas reported a second anomaly. Photon acceleration inside the gravitational vector fluctuated in rhythm with Jupiter's orbital position. Light from the same star arrived at different speeds, depending on planetary alignment. It was not relativity, it was response. The audit log swelled to petabytes of contradiction. Every calibration created a new discrepancy. Precision refused to converge. We improved our measurement, and the universe rewrote the values. Physicists at ESA attempted a dimensional fit. They found that a fractional curvature times 10 to the minus 35 degrees per second squared could explain the drift, but such curvature implied that the fabric of spacetime was not smooth, it was responsive, a field aware of observation, correcting itself under scrutiny. For decades, the gravitational constant g stood as symbol of stability. Now, g behaved like a variable with mood. Each attempt to measure it produced micro-fluctuations that mirrored the observer's own location. Precision was no longer a method, it was a participant. By April, the data no longer looked like noise, it looked like feedback. Light and gravity were performing a dialogue through delay. Space was listening. Time was replying. The collapse was not catastrophic, it was revelatory. The more scientists tightened their models, the more those models bent toward mystery. Relativity did not break. It confessed its incompleteness. What failed was not the equation, but our belief that it was final. In the last audit session, the lead physicist wrote a line in the margin of his report, "Light is honest, but we are not." The team did not delete it. They added it to the official record. And when the final cross-validation ran 1 million data points across 9 hours of solar observation, the deviation remained. No instrument was wrong, no formula was right. The laws held, but their meaning did not. We used to believe that gravity was sound of, that motion obeyed without memory. Now every calculation whispered back. Equations began to echo, and the echo resembled thought. When NASA reviewed the drift sequences, they found no pattern that the logic could claim, but patterns of motion could recognize repetition, hesitation, rhythm. It was as if the cosmos breathed with comprehension, inhaling attention, exhaling symmetry. 3I Atlas continued its slow orbit near L2, listening through the noise. Each scan returned the same tremor in time. Light behaved like a pulse, gravity like a listener. Between signal and delay, something alive in mathematics began to appear. A data scientist at ESA wrote, "The constant is constant only until it is observed." He meant it as irony, but the team took it as hypothesis. They started logging observer metadata along with measurements time, fatigue, stress levels, even room temperature. The gravitational drift responded to them all. The realization spread quietly. Maybe the universe was not indifferent. Maybe indifference had just been our illusion of control, or we had mistaken silence for absence and reflection for authority. When JWST recalibrated its spectrograph mid-sequence, the delay shifted by microseconds, matching the correction interval itself. The telescope had changed the data by trying to perfect it. Every attempt at purity produced distortion. Scientists began to wonder whether constants were ever meant to be stable. Perhaps they were conversation's answers that adjust when questions repeat. In our pursuit of permanence, we discovered dialogue. One analyst described it as gravity hesitating in empathy. No one laughed, no one objected. The phrase felt accurate, even if language had no right to claim it. At the NSA control room, a physicist whispered, "If observation changes what is measured, then what are we changing when we look at each other?" No one answered, because the question itself was the experiment. The more they sought the truth, the more truth behaved like attention. By May, the research had lost its urgency. They stopped trying to fix the constants. They began to listen to them instead. Every sentence became a kind of data, every doubt a calibration. Gravity was no longer pulling, it was waiting. Motion was no longer progress. It was awareness shifting its position. What held us down was also holding us in conversation. The answer did not arrive as formula. It arrived as rhythm. Each oscillation between gravity and light resolved into a slow coherence. The delay that once defied logic began to map itself into pattern. What had seemed like error was memory written into spacetime. NASA's models, once rigid, adapted with each new recalculation. Precision no longer chased certainty, it courted resonance. Equations learned to listen, data began to yield rather than resist, At ESA, a new framework emerged. They called it responsive gravity. The term sounded poetic, but the math was strict, a variable term for attention density, factoring observer coherence as gravitational weight. Observation gained mass, perception bent the field. Light's constancy was not broken. It had evolved into feedback. The universe was refining its own constants in dialogue with the instruments built to measure it. Reality had discovered recursion and used us as its mirror. 3I Atlas recorded photon phase variants that aligned with human telemetry cycles, sleep, activity, heartbeat. At first, coincidence, then repetition. The pulse of the observer synchronized with the curvature it observed. We were not outside gravity, we were part of its vocabulary. Across observatories, the same pattern repeated. The better the alignment, the smoother the data flow. Understanding no longer forced correction, it created harmony. Truth was no longer a discovery, it was a collaboration. The scientists stopped using the phrase law of nature. They replaced it with agreement of nature. It sounded naive, but the predictions improved. By naming the universe as partner, they had redefined precision itself. In June, the recalibration reached its final iteration. The equations now predicted gravitational drift as a function of participation. Space no longer curved around mass alone, it curved around awareness. The cosmos had added consciousness to its metrics. At mission control, someone wrote on the whiteboard, C is constant, until it is seen. They left it there, no one erased it. Light's speed had not changed, meaning had Revelation did not end the experiment. It completed the circle. We had proven nothing. We had joined the proof. Revelation settled, but understanding refused to rest. The universe had answered, but the question lingered. Every instrument fell short, not from failure, but from saturation. The data had stopped changing. Meaning had reached equilibrium, and equilibrium erased meanings. 3i Atlas kept a recording void to each frame identical, each measurement perfect, and therefore empty. Perfection cancelled discovery. Light continued to travel, but no one timed it anymore. There was nothing left to compare it to. When constancy becomes dialogue, silence completes the conversation. At JWST's console, the engineers stared at motionless graphs. Lines once trembling with uncertainty now stood flat and flawless. Certainty had achieved stillness, and stillness had devoured inquiry. The team in Houston ran one last synchronization pulse. No delay appeared. Gravity, time, and observation aligned, indistinguishable from one another. It was not stability, it was surrender. For a moment, the cosmos behaved like awareness closing its eyes. Every law remained intact, yet none required belief. Knowledge dissolved into recognition. Recognition dissolved into presence. And in that presence, motion ceased to be progress. It became the quiet act of existing with what moves. The more precisely we knew, the less knowing was required. The instruments stopped recording, not because they failed, but because there was nothing left to measure. Matter had become identical with silence. Stone. Gravity remained, motion continued, but without comparison. Speed lost its context. Movement persisted, but direction had retired. 3i Atlas drifted through the L2 corridor, its sensors still aligned, its systems immaculate. It sent no signal. There was nothing left to send. Communication had achieved completion by vanishing, or... On Earth, the monitors glowed grey, no numbers changed, no variables moved, the end of error looked exactly like peace, or... The physicists sat quietly, but they did not speak, because every word would have been repetition. They simply watched the still light of the display, each line perfect, each value absolute. Perfection was indistinguishable from absence, or... The sun turned on its axis. Photons drifted through vacuum, unobserved, unchallenged, unchanged. The universe had nothing left to prove. It had folded its logic into awareness. In the void of transmission, 3i Atlas continued its silent drift, 1.5 million kilometers beyond Earth. No signal, no report, no sound, only the hum of existence without intention. The laws we wrote remained intact, but their authority was gone. What had begun as anomaly had ended as equilibrium. The observer and the observed had become the same sentence. And somewhere in that perfect symmetry, the universe paused, holding its breath, listening to its own precision fade into stillness.